Hi guys, it is Dom here from Soundsphere Magazine. Just had the wonderful opportunity to chat to Ben Christo about his time in the Sisters of Mercy for the last 20 years, heading into a tour in the US with Black Audio as well, talking about his career, his own band Diamond Black, his attitude to touring, becoming sober, working with some of the biggest musicians in the world, and so much more. Meditation in there as well, the good bits of meditation. So there's loads of cool stuff in this. Thank you so much for making the time to watch it. Thank you so much for your support of Soundsphere. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate everybody who is involved in pulling something like this together. So thank you. Speak to you soon. Hopefully you enjoy this. I need to get better at these intros. Take it easy. Bye. I wanted to chat to you for a long time because obviously we're going to talk about the Sisters tour that you're doing, talking about packing stuff in, but I also want to talk about your extensive, career. We touched on it a little bit just then. Like you've obviously worked with the Sisters for like over 20 years, but then you've also got Diamond Black, you've got other projects and you do session work. You are a busy guy, as we talked about. So how would you say, I suppose it's a similar line of questioning the before, like how would you say you've changed and developed as a person since the beginning of your career and all the stuff you were doing back then to now fitting in session work, fitting in sister stuff, fitting in your own projects and touring and grafting as you're doing now? So how have you changed and developed? What have you learned about yourself from the beginning of your career till where you are now?
I'd say straight away, I would say a huge change that I've brought about in the last few years is the phrase progress, not perfection.
Right.
And being able to recognize that just getting on with stuff and it not necessarily being the best it could possibly be right now is part of the making of it happening. And that recognition that some of the works that we look to, that we really admire, that we venerate, whether that be movie or book or video, it's probably not the perfect way that the person wanted it to be. But they got on with it and they did it and they finished it and they moved on to the next thing. So progress, not perfection, is really important to me. Picking battles as well is really important to me. Recognizing that when is the right time to really fight for the thing that you believe for a certain project, and when is the time to go, actually, if I can recognize that this is more important to the other person.
Right.
And in order for the bigger picture to work, I can make a sacrifice there of maybe I didn't want that to be red. I wanted it to be purple, but how important really is it if that person really wants it to be that color? Recognizing those times of when it's okay to to make those sacrifices and compromises if they're not as important to you as some other things.
Right.
And also a sense of not needing to take ownership for when things go well for the project. So what I mean by that is we all have this urge that if there's a good idea, we want everybody to know it was our idea. And sometimes we'll fight for our ideas just because they're our ideas, even if they're not necessarily the right idea. And it's being able to recognize that it's just important that it gets done, not that everybody knows it was my idea. Is something that I've struggled with for a long time. And I've many years of like, but people must know that I came up with this. No one cares. What they care about is what the end product makes them feel. Yeah. Not who did it, not who was this or who was that or who wrote this. It's just, what does it make me feel like? And if the work that we do towards creative projects can create the best result at the end, and as long as, we're all being compensated in the sense that no one's losing out in terms of what they're owed for the work they've done, behind the scenes, and the recognition that you get that, yes, your name is on there. It doesn't have to be, David Jones. Not, he worked on this song, but it's not like he did chorus 1, chorus 2, but he didn't do the middle section, but he did that really clever bit in the verse 2, where it's like recognizing that stuff doesn't matter. It's just about getting the work done. So those things have really helped from this. I was very neurotic at the start about these things. And I'm still very neurotic and still very anxious, but I'm able to catch the fear thoughts now and analyze them and go, I recognize this. This is what I always feel when this sort of thing happens. Okay, step back. How can I approach this in a different way? Rather than just in the past being reactive, not necessarily in a way that would be inflammatory to other people, but in a way that would be inflammatory to myself. Right. Like I feel really strongly about this thing and I'm upset by it, but I'm not going to say anything, so I'm just going to suffer. Instead, it would be, I'm not going to suffer. I'm going to recognize that actually this isn't that important in the grand scheme of things. So those principles have changed. And the biggest principle, I think, in the last few years is I stopped drinking completely for 2.5 years. And thank you, mate. And I'm an alcoholic. I know, because I can't drink without it becoming abusive to myself.
Right.
Therefore, even though I've been sober for 2.5 years, I still recognize that I'm alcoholic, because if I went and I drank again, the same things would happen. A good analogy for it is, imagine you have this terrible room in your house. Just because you lock the door and you don't go in that room, the room hasn't changed. The room will be the same when you go back in.
Still there, yeah.
Yeah, it's still there. And that's, I think, what would happen with me. So the amount of time, headspace, and sense of calm and money that I've sort of saved by not drinking has been immense. And it's really helped me to be able to work multiple projects over the last few years.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been very, very productive. Well, I know you've been very productive from your credits, but I think what's interesting there is you've talking about how you've changed and developed and how you've become, I've interpreted it as a bit less kind of, a little bit less ego in terms of what you wanted to achieve, and, you getting certain things across, on credits or whatever. So having worked with some of the most interesting personalities in rock, and also having done it for such a long time, and having the reputation that you do, is there a sort of secret sauce, as it were, to being able to stay in a band or stay involved with a band like Sisters for 20 years and also have your own projects? Because it's very different, I guess, going from Sisters, where you're working in a very different context, to managing your own projects where you're in control. What's the secret sauce, as it were, to being that kind of jack of all trades, where you can kind of go between two worlds almost?
I think in both instances, it's about doing a lot of listening and asking questions.
Right.
And whether you're being the leader or you're being in some way a subordinate to somebody else, the same principles apply. Ask questions and listen. Because obviously, if you're working for someone, it's really important that you are understanding what they want to do and where they want to go with stuff. But also, if people are working, let's say, with you or even for you, the same principles apply. People only do things if you're paying them or if they want to, right? Or if you're threatening them, which is obviously not on the table. And I think that the most powerful way that you can make things happen is creating a space where people are excited about doing the things that will help the whole project go forward and feel passionate about it. And so how do you do that? Well, you listen to what people want and you ask them about their opinions and how they would do it. And often that can either lead to something that you never would have imagined, or if they bring in something that's so wildly different, that's the time when you go, okay, well, I can see why you wanted to do that. Here's what I was thinking. Is there some way we can combine these ideas, and how would we do it? So that's, I think, is a principle, is just trying to make people feel energized about the project, which can be really hard when you're in bands at a DIY level, like many of the bands that I've worked with and continue to work with are, because there's very little money involved. So there isn't that sense of, oh, we're just doing this because we know we're going to get paid. It's more like you really have to try and make people feel excited about it. And for many years in bands, I think I struggled with my own bands, because often it was like a relationship. You start the band and everyone's excited and vibing. This is going to be the best thing ever. And then when you release that first album and you are really proud of it and you think, this is amazing, we should be super successful, but that's just the beginning. And then you have to do it again. And if there's not like money coming in, then it's very easy for people to become discouraged, or just simply that their reality of their home life or their work life takes precedence, because it has to. And so getting people to feel excited and vibed up about a project, I think is very challenging, but one of the most important principles.
Yeah, yeah. I think, what's particularly interesting again is that you've been able to do that across projects. And a question I wanted to ask you is, has your definition of success changed over the course of your career? As someone that has toured on a DIY level, but also toured with some of the, biggest names in the world, in certain scenes, and you're obviously notable, in various scenes for your guitar work, for the work across the board, really. So in terms of success, how do you define it, and how has that changed across your career?
I when I began playing, I think when you're a kid, you're sort of spoon-fed a very simple two-dimensional sense of success, which is about things like being famous and everybody knowing who you are.
Right.
And that often can lead to some sort of ego-driven parameters, which can be pretty detrimental when it comes to working with other people. So those initial senses, I mean, the first two shows I ever saw as a kid in very quick succession were arena shows of AC/DC and Judas Priest. So straight away, you've got this sense of enormity, and that's the goal. The goal is to play like Angus Young literally being lifted up on a podium in front of however many thousand people it was. That's what you're supposed to do in order to be successful. But over the years, I think I've discovered that there's a very clear definition between fame and success.
Right.
Because I actually think fame is potentially a very toxic and dangerous thing. Because the key principle of fame is that you lose control of the way that you are presented to the world.
Okay, yeah.
And if you're someone who suffers from anxiety, which most of us do on some level, you have to be incredibly strong to be able to go, I don't care what that magazine or those people or whatever is saying about me this week. Literally thousands of people commenting on me and something that was misunderstood or misinterpreted about what I did. Or even this, I absolutely stand by what I said, and I have to now withstand the haters. Unless you're someone who can do that, you can see very easily how some of the most like iconic and famous people of our time fell foul to drugs and alcoholism and even suicide because of losing control of the way in which they were presented to the world. And then the kind of either the toxicity of the malice towards them, or also the toxicity of the adulation, the false adulation, and the obsession that some like very famous people suffer from, like, people just obsessing about them or what the idea of them and losing control that way. So unless you've got mental fortitude to deal with that level of extraneous pressure and opinion on your value as a human being, then fame is a very dangerous thing. And also you start to measure yourself, I can imagine, by how famous am I at the moment? And if I'm not very famous at the moment, maybe I'm not very worthwhile as a human being.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It's like a sort of false currency of imagining like there's a certain amount of value that you have through how widely publicized you are. You'd look at it basically, very basic would be how many Instagram followers I've got. And if, oh shit, I've got 3,000 less than I did this time last year, maybe I'm not as worthwhile as a human being anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think those ideas of fame that when I was a kid, I aspired towards, I am very far removed from now. Because I'm not famous and I've never been famous, but I have worked with people who are famous, and I've seen what it can do. And some of them have dealt with it very well and some have not. And some have not been able to trust anybody around them because they don't know why that person wants to be connected to them. Is it because they're trying to get something out of them? Is it for the association they'll get? Is it for money? And are they really your friend? Right. And I've seen other people who have been successful and managed to keep hold of their mental fortitude, but they've had to be extremely cold and cut off a lot of people from their life as a way of remaining sane.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So my idea of success now comes down to, I think, two or three very simple principles. One is, if you're passion can inspire and empower people, that's successful. The thing that you love doing, if that can make other people, whether that be 10 people or 10,000 people, feel something, have an emotional connection, and feel a sense of empowerment through it in the way that I'm sure you have grown up with bands that just made you feel like you, and said it in a way that you never could, and you could only listen to that one album that whole like month because it was so important to you. If you can do that, doing the thing you authentically love doing, not doing like, oh, I should probably do this music because everyone's really into it, but doing the thing that you love doing, that is success, whether that be 10 people, 10,000 people. I also think success for me has been in following the thing I'm passionate about, has taken me to a place where I've been able to work with people who are heroes of mine, inspirations to me. And whether that be simply to be in the same backstage as them, like playing on the same bill at a festival, or even in some cases to actually be working, writing, recording, performing live with them. That to me is the highest like pinnacle of success, of validation of the thing that I love doing. I'm good enough at it to work with people that inspired me to do it in the first place.
Yeah, man. Yeah. That's awesome. And I'm so glad that you've got that, and that kind of, I guess it's that validation is key. And you've got there where you can have that confidence for yourself, and then that can hopefully inspire other people as well. That's kind of what I've got from what you've said, which is awesome. A couple more questions, Ben. I came up with one just while you were talking in terms of, because I know you've got the tour with the sisters coming up in the US. Obviously, it's going to be plenty of dates. In terms of your attitude to touring, now that you are sober, that you have, you've worked with yourself, you meditate, you do all this stuff. What are the challenges of getting that stuff done on tour? I imagine a lot of people maybe ask questions of you. A lot of people will be interested in your take on this. If they want to quit drinking, if they want to make time to meditate on tour, where there's a lot of pressure, time, time management, deadlines, etc., in terms of getting things done by a certain time every day. What are the challenges that you face going on tour, and how do you manage those? And I guess, again, how has your attitude to touring changed? Because it must have, from what you've told me, from where you were to where you are now.
Well, in my experience of, let's say, meditation, is that you can't fail when you meditate. All right. Okay. Everybody's got this sense that if you sit, not everybody, but there's a widespread that I certainly had this concept for a very, very long time, until quite recently when I met someone who was much more experienced with meditation than I was, that it doesn't have to be that you sit down and within a couple of minutes you've withdrawn and you're really connected to your true self and all this, and you're seeing through your mystical third eye and all this kind of stuff. It's like sometimes you can have those experiences where you do really feel in the moment. A lot of the time, you sit there and you think about your problems and you can't switch that off, right? But if you have tried to do it, I think that's half the battle. You've put that time aside, and it really could just be 5 to 10 minutes. And surely everybody has 5 to 10 minutes a day when they can just sit and feel their breath. And all it's just about feeling your breath and feeling your present moment rather than rushing into the next thing. And that's what I would say to anybody, is like, just try for 5 to 10 minutes just to sit and feel your breath. That's all it is. And that physiologically, if you breathe deeply, it calms your brain and your body down. So that even if it's just to make yourself feel a bit more peaceful, that is more than enough and more than what most people would be doing. When it comes to fitting this stuff in a schedule, again, it depends on the level of the touring you're doing. When I play with bands like the Sisters, I have a lot of free time because we have such a great team around us. When I play with my band Diamond Black, there's much less time because I'm doing a lot of those jobs myself. Yeah. So it sort of depends on the nature of the tour that you're doing. But I would say on a Sisters tour, I actually have found that I have a lot more time to be mindful, to work on on actual physical training, like working out as well, because you have, when you're on a touring schedule like that, you've always got essentially the same amount of hours each day when you're not doing anything but it's never quite enough to go off and do something else. So you can't get super involved in something else. Like you can't go off and be like, right, I'm going to go and do some like massive trek around the mountains, or even you can't get too much into a work project because you might at any time be called to the stage, or you might have to go down to the venue. But it does mean that you can spend some time walking or exercising or doing admin, things that you can sort of get in and out of. So I think when you are touring, it all depends on what your goals are. And if you can be happy with just doing a couple of things per day for yourself, progress, not perfection, then that will make you feel a lot better over the whole tour rather than, oh, I can't be bothered to do anything because there's no point because I haven't got any time. So I'm just going to drink instead.
Yeah.
And again, not drinking has given me so much time back because my days off used to be just hangovers.
Right. Yeah. So you've got time for yourself now. Yeah. I wanted to squeeze in a question because we work with a lot of young people who they're dealing with certain mental health challenges, anxiety, as you mentioned, and they might look at someone like yourself and be like, oh, well, how do I get to Ben's level where you're not only touring the world, but you're also doing, you become a go-to guy for numerous bands and artists for session work, for recording, things like that. What is the secret to, you seem to me, from what I know of you, what I've read, you seem to me to be a great networker. You're able to get yourself in many different spaces. What is the secret to your success when it comes to, coming back to that word again, when it comes to creating so many job opportunities for yourself, putting yourself in the right spaces? Some people might say, look, but obviously you've had years and years of developing skill and years of becoming the go-to guy for a lot of bands. So what would you say to any young person who maybe is maybe looking at you, maybe they see the sisters, maybe they see your own band Diamond Black and goes, well, I can't do that. I can't do what Ben does because it's far too, I live in a tiny town in the north of England, for example, and so that those opportunities just aren't there for me.
Well, I've always been very bad at hustling and that whole sense of like keeping phoning people up and going, hey, I can do the job. I'm really good at the job. Let me do the job. Right. And I was sort of told as I was growing up, that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And perhaps if you have a personality where you feel comfortable doing that, then yes, do that because that's being authentic to yourself. If you're like me and the idea of that is terrifying, and I just struggle even with my bands giving out flyers to people. I can't bear the rejection of someone going, what the fuck's this? Even though I understand some people, they don't care. They just give out flyers. People don't want them, don't care. But I think the way that you can connect with people and empathize with people is by a combination of, as I said, listening and asking questions, being genuinely interested in stuff, because there's this great phrase I learned somewhere that was something like, every person is my superior, and in that I learn from them, which is true. Like every single person you meet is better than you at something, right?
Yeah.
And you can learn from people and you can listen to what they're interested in. Just simple ways of rephrasing when you meet somebody, rather than saying like, what job do you do? You just say, what do you enjoy doing? And suddenly that just opens that. You see people's eyes light up because they're like, oh, wow, I love hiking and I love collecting pictures of crocodiles or whatever it is, right? That's what you like doing, not what your job is. Because for a lot of people, we do jobs that perhaps make us feel frustrated, or even if they're jobs we like doing, like it's still work and it's still like, oh shit. But when you talk to people about what they like doing, that can be so much more fascinating and interesting for both of you. So yeah, asking questions and listening and not feeling a necessity to prove who you are when you're in the room.
Nice,
and to almost like whip out your CV straight away. Or if someone goes, oh, I've done this thing, I was working with this person. Oh, yes, I've worked with them too, actually. Funny thing. And making it immediately about yourself. Instead, in that situation, if that person were to say, I worked with David Smith last week, and you're like, oh, wow, so what was the most challenging thing about that? Well, and then suddenly that's a much more fun conversation than, oh, yeah, David Smith, yeah, actually, I didn't work with him myself, but my friend's brother's sister's dog once actually, trying to make it about yourself will always... We've all had that when we've talked to someone about something that we're maybe quite proud of, and they immediately make it their own thing and turn it about themselves. So not that need to not prove your CV. And also I've seen it on tour quite a lot with people who come into maybe a new environment, that they spend a lot of the time, one, trying to be funny, and two, trying to consistently name drop and secure your belief in the fact they should be there. But the truth is, if you're already in the room, you don't need to prove that you should already be in the room, because you're already in the room. And the way that you can then make sure that your relationship with the people around you continues is to really just take a genuine interest in these other fantastic, amazing people that you've had the privilege to meet, rather than constantly talk about yourself or prove why you should be there.
Yeah, I've just learned something from talking to you, Ben, because I think there is that tendency to be like, oh, well, you're justifying your space in that world, and I've been guilty of that. So I've just got an interesting take from you there. So thank you very much for that. Before we do the promo questions and the roundup, I wanted to ask you about what you're listening to at the moment, because again, you're in so many bands, bands that are, again, great acclaim. Pig, Lord of the Lost, for example, obviously the Sisters, there's so many. What do you listen to? Because I guess the bands you're associated with, you could tag them goth, industrial, you could tag them whatever. But what are the kind of things that you're listening to that you go to when you're well, not meditating, but when you're trying to chill and relax? What kind of stuff are you listening to? What kind of stuff are you vibing with at the moment, musically?
I guess, like a lot of people, we have now music for different purposes. And a lot of the time in this first part of the day, I will listen, if I'm doing like work or just catching up with emails, I'll often just listen to very ambient, like meditation music, because I want to concentrate on what I'm doing, not start singing along or playing air drums, which I will do. And then if I find that I've got a very simple task to do, like some admin thing where you're just filling in a form or doing some shopping, like some weekly shopping, whatever, that's when I put the tunes on, because then you make it fun. You feel energized about, right, I am cleaning the kitchen, or I am like doing my weekly shopping or whatever. And that's when the tunes come on. And what I'd normally, my go-tos then would be albums that I'm really familiar with, because I want to rock out and sing along. I'm not listening to learn something new. I'm listening to be energized by something I'm familiar with. Yeah. And I think my go-tos on that are usually stuff like, I'll go to the classic albums of the 80s that I grew up on, like AC/DC's For Those About to Rock, or Def Leppard Hysteria, or Bon Jovi, or I'll go to a lot of bands from like the kind of grunge metal bands from my teenage years, like Therapy and Nine Inch Nails and stuff like that. Or I'll go to, I was a big fan of like the turn of the century emo, new metal, hardcore stuff.
Yeah.
So, Seven Dust and Thursday, Boy Sets Fire, The Used, these bands. And I've heard, rightly or wrongly, that apparently when you hit 30, you stop listening to new bands. And I think I've been sort of guilty of that. So what I tried to do at the start of the year, and then it lasted about 3 days, was every morning go for a walk listening to the New Rock playlist on Spotify.
Yeah.
And that was really good. And I want to start doing it again, because I'd go for like a 20-minute walk listening to completely new rock music and learning from it and going, or hearing something, go, oh, that's really interesting. Maybe I'll try and do something like that in one of my songs. So mostly I would just listen to stuff that I already love. And that's anywhere within the subgenre of rock. So, industrial, punk, new metal, hardcore, goth. And if there's one through line of the music that I like, it's not about genre, it's dark, gritty melody. I think that's what I like. Dark, gritty melody. And whether that be Nine Inch Nails, or whether that be some kind of like old Nick Kershaw song where it's got a bit of a darker edge to it, or whatever it is, that's the through line for me.
Right. I love that, dark and gritty. It's my vibe, Ben, for sure. Better a promo question then. What's the mood like? I was buzzed to read in the press release that Chris is back in the band as well. Go quite far back with Chris and Eureka Machines. What is the vibe now in the Sisters camp as you head into this tour in October? Obviously, you've done a bunch of bigger shows as well, big festivals over the last few years. What's the mood like? What is the vibe like as you head into these these October dates over in the US?
Well, it's amazing to be back with Chris again. You know, Chris and I have known each other since 2005 or six,
Yeah.
and and we've been in so many situations together over the years with the sisters. We also spent a certain amount of time playing in a different big international touring band as well. And so I've had so many great experiences. To have him back again, like it was so surprising that he was back into the fold, and all the old jokes coming out, all the old characters, all the old personalities and the stupid voices. It's really, really fun to be sort of, it's a bit like some kind of Netflix series where they bring this character back. You're like, yes, he's back. So that's been really fun. And also he and I have changed quite a lot since we worked together. And I think now we get on even better because we've just both grown up a lot. Certainly I have, in terms of just what it's like to work in that sort of quite high pressure environment of being on tour.
Yeah, yeah.
So that vibe is great. And having brought Kai into the fold as well, Kai being someone that I worked with on a few projects before. And I really enjoy Kai being around because I feel like that's something that they've always deserved, is to tour on that level, on that sort of next step up of international touring in those sort of size venues, because Kai is such an accomplished musician and such an ambitious entity that I feel it's like there's a certain validation and justification of someone who is such a brilliant person and musician being able to work in that environment. So it's nice. It's a nice combination of old friendships and new friendships, and us sort of working together on making the show as good as we can.
Absolutely. And do you get something out of, as, an accomplished live musician, do you get something out of that level, that performing at that level? Do you feel like, as someone that's done the DIY and can do that as well, someone that, in terms of performing at that level, doing the Sick New Worlds, doing, these mega tours, what's it like for you in terms of the mood and the vibe? Do you still love it in the same way that you did 20 plus years ago when you joined the sisters first time?
I think I love it more now because I don't feel so riddled with anxiety and fear all the time, as I did back then, of just, am I doing something wrong all the time?
Right.
And also having been in the band for longer, and like any company, the longer you're there, the more you understand how it works, the more you get on with your compadres and stuff. But yeah, I think I understand it more now, and I like it more because I recognize what's important to me, and I can try and really focus on those things more so now.
Nice,
and it's an absolute privilege, and we're so blessed to be able to do it, particularly after COVID and not being able to do it. And just sort of remembering that it was only 2 years ago, pretty much, when we weren't doing anything. So, so being back out again is great.
Absolutely, man. I'm so excited for you. And last one is there anything I've missed today that you would like to plug? Anything that you've got going on that you can tell me that you've got that you want to plug?
Well, I've been working hard with my band Diamond Black now, particularly for the last year or so. We released a single called Through the Misery, which is on YouTube and Spotify and all the rest of it. And we did a bunch of really fun shows over the course of the last year. And so any kind of interaction and follows on Instagram and stuff would be, and we got a new YouTube channel that we're really developing at the moment. So yeah, if you like a mixture of sort of dark 80s rock with arena big choruses and stuff, then with some thought out lyrics, then you'll like Diamond Black.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and great questions, Dom. I really appreciate it too.